Hello, everyone. My name is Felipe Rincón, Associate Director and Fellow of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center. And today, I'm just so delighted to share the virtual space with Felipe Rincón, Vice President of Public Policy for Latin America and the Caribbean and MasterCard. Felipe, thank you so much for joining us today and agreeing to this Experts of the Americas interview.
Hello, Pepe. No, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to the Atlantic Council. And great to talk with you and exchange views of what's going on in LAC.
Very excited about this interview. Before that, let me just say a couple quick words about the context of this interview and broader project that we have. The Adrian Arch Latin America Center, where I work, we focus on Latin America and the Caribbean strategic role in a global context, always with a priority on the pressing political and economic issues that will define the region's trajectory. And at this moment, we're very much committed to helping the region use the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath as an inflection point to leapfrog economic development. And as part of that process, we have partnered with the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, to better understand the opportunities and challenges that the private sector sees in the region. And in doing that, also to better understand the critical role that the private sector has played and can continue to play in supporting economic recovery and prosperity, long-term prosperity in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today's interview is part of a conversation series with Latin American private sector leaders on these topics. And today we'll specifically focus on MasterCard's perspective and talk about the broader financial services space and technology space. The insights shared today and throughout this series of conversations will provide input for a forthcoming Atlantic Council IDB report. Once again, Felipe, we're very lucky to have you today. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll begin. The first question, Felipe, I'd like to ask you is a global question. It's one of my favorite questions and a tough one. We know, for example, that MasterCard is a multinational company that operates in different geographies. We also know that MasterCard really values the Latin American Caribbean market. It's a key market for you guys. The question is why? Why is Latin America and Caribbean such an important market? What are some unique factors that make this region so important, especially compared to some of the other regions? And I'm asking this because we know that even fairly recently, MasterCard was making important acquisitions and partnership plans with payment companies, for example, like Galileo and Arcus in the region. So walk us through that.
Thank you, Pepe. Yes, absolutely. For us, LAC is a region that is extremely important. Not only because of the market itself, but the culture, the appetite of consumers to use new technologies. I think in our region, there is demand for consumers and they are technology savvy. They want to be included. They want to unlock the opportunities of e-commerce. And we are seeing a lot of governments also really making progress in terms of adjusting the regulatory landscape so that the region can make a lot of progress in terms of bringing the new technologies, like things like the mobile broadband can bring to consumers, to merchants, to government. I think there's a lot of appetite to tap upon those opportunities, for example, to make the government more efficient and more effective. You were mentioning about COVID, and one of the things is, it was a great opportunity, right? People, had opportunity or were to a certain degree pushed to use new technology. So people that used to be in a very comfortable zone by using cash, they now had to start using other technologies to send money electronically to family and friends. And the government too need to find ways to use technology to, in a better way, in an easier and more efficient and transparent and secure way, push funds to consumers, in particular, benefits in the context of COVID. All of this, I think, needs to be framed in the context of a region where there is tremendous opportunity because of informality. I think one of the big things that characterize Latin America is that when you go, country by country, typically it's about 40–60% the level of informality. And when you think about informality, it has a lot to do with things like, people that don't have the means to pay taxes or to for whatever reason, they prefer not to have formal labor contracts, but everything is informal, or they prefer just to have an informal little company that is not registered, and so on. But I think because of that, the population and the economy in general, um, they're losing a lot, right? In terms of, they're not as competitive. We're not as competitive as we could be. So I think the story in Latin America is this big wave that we're seeing with, we're going to be talking more about this, fintech, digitization, use of mobile broadband is really, really a fantastic opportunity to Latin America to really leapfrog and truly include, a good chunk of that 40-50% of people that haven't had access really, and small business, where that's been the case.
Thank you, Felipe. So many good points. So we'll pick up on the point of the role of government later on again and fully impact that. Hopefully that'll give us an opportunity to do that. But on the point you mentioned about the opportunities and also the missed opportunities that the region faces, how the region can leapfrog to the next level. Here is where we think the private sector can play a critical role as an agent of change. And this is my second question, which is, you mentioned informality, for example, and we know that the region has its challenges, many social economic challenges facing the region. And my question is, what are some of the most important key challenges that you see facing the region, and how has MasterCard sought to help address that? In addition to informality, we know, for example, the region has significant inequality issues, gender-based, and we know that there's a lot of environmental related issues and challenges facing the region. And we know MasterCard has been very much involved in and committed to some of those regional social efforts, specifically on the gender point and an environmental point. We know initiatives like Girls for Tag and reforestation efforts, such as the Priceless Planet Coalition. Anyways, love to hear your thought. What are some of the key challenges facing the region, and how has MasterCard sought to address that?
Yeah, I think where to start, Pepe. There's so many things, so many angles. But one of the things that we care about deeply is, it's not about just financial inclusion. It's the implication of people not being included. I think that one of the challenges that we're seeing today is that people have access to content online. They have access to educational material. They are connected, right? It's easy to create social networks. It's easy to be in contact with the community. But what is still challenging is to pay online, and that has a lot to do also with the challenge of providing your identification online, right? The technology to really be able to tell a counterparty on the other side that you are really who you're saying you are. And this is important because if you don't solve those challenges, it's going to be problematic. It's going to be more challenging to transition from paper-based payments, right, whether it's cash or checks, to electronic payments. The problem with that is that when you cannot do that, it's going to be very hard for you to create, for example, a credit history to show, if you're a small company and an SME, to show, these are this is my business, this is my revenue, and with that, access to credit, right? I think access to credit, it's the big equalizer, right? It's the big thing that really changes the perspective of a little or a small business, right? Be able to finance its inventory, its labor costs, even investing in new technologies, even investing in a loyalty program if you're a small independent restaurant. But the problem with that is that for you to be, connected to the financial sector, one, and this is the problem. It's a service, right? And somehow you have to pay one way or another for the service because there's a cost of providing that service to you. And so that's one big problem, and we need to come up, the private sector, to new ways to make sure that there are more efficient ways to reach those individuals, those businesses that so far haven't been included. The great news in there, we can talk a little bit more that, Pepe, if you want, is that, you know, the, 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 um, the big thing that can help the society leapfrog is technology. And we could talk a little bit about that, of course, but now there are, many other options to connect, right? It's not about the traditional banking sector as we know that, the sector has been under profound transformation. And that has happened because the government and policymakers have put, new structures in place. And I'm proud to say that we have been part of the force, right, to accelerate that process along to many allies in the markets. But that's one thing, right? It's make sure that the product is there and that the product is cost efficient, so that you reach the lower basis of society. The other big thing that I want to emphasize, Pepe, is the reason why you might have second thoughts about being included. Again, it's because you want to, you're going to be, for example, more visible, and you're going to be in a position where you need to, for example, pay taxes. So if the tax structure is not reasonable for you, it's not a good, value proposition for you to step up and become informal. Typically, what's going to happen is people are not going to make that decision. The good thing that is happening, and I want to highlight that, is we're seeing, policymakers moving in that direction. We have in Uruguay the model called as monotributo, and in Colombia the model called as modelo simple, which are ways of sort of, you think about formalization as a process, right? Like a staircase towards formalization. This would be the first step, right? It's making it easier, right? Logistically, operationally, right? So that you don't have to hire an accountant and spend a lot of money, but in a very easy way, right? Be a taxpayer, right? In these models, right? You pay a little sum monthly or in the quarter that will bring you completely, with peace of mind that you are okay with the federal tax collector and the state tax collector, and you're formal, right? Because of these models. So let me stop there. I know you want to talk about the Planet Coalition and our commitments to include consumers with certain targets, but let me stop there if you want to make some questions on what I just said.
No, Felipe, I thought that was great. I mean, we all know that the digital financial and technological transformation represents such an important opportunity for SMEs and for other population groups in other segments of society. But it was great to hear some of the little steps, concrete little steps that we have to take to make that qualitative leap from paper to digital. So it's great to hear some of these specific examples. You talked about credit history, access to credit, how to make this financial system work more efficiently, ID, many other things. So that was great. Now, I do want to ask you more about the government part. You mentioned that in your response to the two previous questions, alluding to the fact that this is such an important transformation, but this is not something that the private sector or any sector can really take on completely on its own. The government clearly has a critical role to play in there. You talked about formalization, among other things. So let me ask you more about that. And here I want to not just talk about the public sector, but also the multilateral organizations, including the IDB, are partners for this project. And the question is, how exactly can the public sector and multilateral organizations help make Latin American Caribbean more business investment friendly for companies like MasterCard? And exactly to the point about partnerships, how can partnerships also play in a role in all of this great opportunity that we just discussed?
Yes, Pepe. I think the short answer to your question. I'm passionate about public policies, right? That's what I do in MasterCard and what I have been doing about for some time. The short answer to your question, Pepe, is public policies matter, right? And oftentimes what we're seeing is, of course, we are, in a global challenge, a global political challenge. Oftentimes what you see is, because of the impact of social network, right? People communicate very fast. And oftentimes when there are true problems that needs to be solved and are real problems and that needs to be tackled, oftentimes, uh, people jump too fast to suggest solutions that might seem like ideal in the short term, but in reality, afterwards, there are lots of unintended consequences. And I think that you know the IDB uh, can, with um, distance and the opportunity to see more the woods, right? Be a force to rebalance, the appetite, to come up with easy fixes, right? That are a little bit that are popular, but not necessarily what really, um, will be an accelerator, right, to the development of the markets. We're seeing that, the reality is, in general, you're thinking about your question referred to investment, right? And whenever you invest, it's because you see that you can innovate, you can disrupt, you can do something in a better way with technology, but also there should be an incentive, right? Investors want the return, right? Oftentimes, not only Mastercard, but many big companies, we work for shareholders. Some of our shareholders are also uh, pensioners. We manage um, assets from, in our case, from our shareholders, and it's always, when you think about investment, is how is the return going to look like? And I think that oftentimes regulators in Latin America, or policymakers in Latin America, or politicians in Latin America, they're jump too fast to the solution of controlling too much the value proposition, the quality of the services, the economics of the service, if you know what I mean. I think about the fintech industry, Pepe, right? The fintech industry and the fintech wave. And when I say fintech, it's not only about traditional startups. When I say fintech, I also think about how many banks, for example, are pivoting and becoming truly fintech industries, and they're doing so in many circumstances, many situations, with the support and with certain promotion by the regulator. And the point I want to make here is, ultimately, if all this investment that has been fueling the fintech industry for many years now, which is still there, right? This year it's been slowing down a little bit. It has a lot to do with the returns over your investment. And I think that sometimes, for example, in our world, I mean, the way we think about this is you need to make sure that all the players in the value chain, they have a business case that is healthy and is, of course, subject to competitive pressure. So, for instance, if you're an issuer of a payment means, right, whether a traditional bank or a fintech player, what's your business case and how resilient and how healthy it is? And of course, subject to competitive pressure. Same if you're an acquirer, same if you're a provider of digital identity. Um, so I think that, we need to, policymakers should always try to reach that delicate balance of understanding really how your industry works, right? And which are the risks that you're asking or you're expecting your players to take, and which are the rewards also. Because if there should be also rewards, incentives to participate. And I think I'm talking, on behalf of a company here, but I think, all my colleagues in the private sector will agree with this, right? So I think that is important. And also, promote new business model opening spaces, right, to new business models. uh, and and I think the good news is, in Latin America, policymakers have been doing a fantastic job, right, over the course of the last 8 to 10 years. Almost all countries in Latin America have put in place what could be called, regulations, so that there are providers of electronic payments that are not banks, right? Because they don't intermediate funds. You could call them non-lending deposit-taking institutions, which are organizations that are um, regulated, sorry, that take deposits from the public that are need to comply with regulations and risk management, fit and proper tests, you name it, but have lighter regulation than banks because they don't intermediate money, right? And that's a way that is very has been very successful to create competitive pressure, right? To make sure that there's innovation, that there are new business models. With that kind of um, opportunity, now we have, for example, branchless banks, right? Branch banks that don't necessarily have to be, have physical branches, but they are fully online. And I think those kind of policy measures, right, that promote but are friendly with the economic proposition of the industry is the right way to go. Let me stop there, see if there's any, if that was clear, Pepe.
No, that was great, Felipe. No, we absolutely agree that public policy matters. We absolutely agree that regulations matter. And very much to your point, some of the other interviews in this series, folks also talked about the importance of public policy and regulations. And of course, this delicate balance and how do you encourage innovation investment without stifling competition and related issues. So it's a tricky balance, and absolutely agree that in such a fast evolving field like the digital technological space, that public policy needs to come from some sort of consultations and dialogues with the private sector. And I really like the whole of value chain, whole of ecosystem kind of approach you just mentioned. And let's make sure that there's a vibrant ecosystem for innovation across the value chain. Now, my next question is more on the business side of things. You did mention, for example, in your comments about the importance of encouraging business case across the value chain. And the question here is more about the impact of COVID, the pandemic. We talked a little bit about digitization, for example. The business models and consumer needs really have evolved significantly throughout the pandemic. And I want to hear a little bit more about how MasterCard is adapting to some of these changes on the business side, perhaps stepping a little bit away from the public policy side of things. Tell us more about some of the exciting changes happening there.
Pepe, that's a great question. And I think, there were positive consequences of the pandemic, right? And one of the interesting effects is that we were, there's something that we called up card present transactions and card not present, right? Card present is when you interact physically, right? A card with a POS, right? With the pandemic, people, of course, people were locked and they wanted to ask for, groceries, whatever. And when they started going in person, they didn't want to touch anything, right? So as a result, there was a tremendous acceleration of something that we and I would say the industry in general, right, had been working for many years, which was, a good way of explaining this is, chip and pin, right? The chip in the car. There was a technology that came some years ago. We needed to adapt the technology, the chip, the cards, the physical cards, and the POSs, right? And that was a process that was costly, took a lot of time. But that was a fundamental, huge evolution in terms of security, right? From the level of security back in the day with Stripe and then with chip and pin. I think from the business point of view, and from the to your point, the big thing that happened is, the industry had been working for years on how to bring an equivalent level of security and experience for online transactions or card not present transactions. And I think we were somehow ready to support this natural appetite that happened during COVID. And what we saw is, as a result of what we have been talking about, we were growing at, let's say, 1x the growth of card not present or online transaction. It accelerated 3 times or even more depending on the country. So again, because people needed to start using payment that is online. So that was a good development, and now that has triggered a lot of interesting things for consumers and for merchants. All of a sudden, people are not used anymore, or putting in the affirmative, are used to go out without the card because they have their payment means in the watch, right? Their payment credentials. Um, people are using more user interfaces that you have in your mobile, where you have credentials of different cards or payment systems, right? So I think that this has a fundamental, shift in how the payment industry, is working. I think that all of a sudden, the reality today is we call this multi-homing, right? Multi-homing is this ability of, two parts that are using a platform to jump and choose, different platforms. For example, we are using whatever platform, whether it's Zoom, WhatsApp, Teams, you name it, and you can easily jump from platform to platform depending on what you need, right? Well, that's a similar trend is happening in payments, right? Because you have your credentials of, whether it's there are very famous brands here in the US. I don't want to mention them because, but P2P systems, systems to send money to your relatives, or other, systems to pay, for example, for a regular payment that you have to make for utilities, for example, right? So in Latin America, we have many account-to-account systems. And what's happening from the business point of view, Pepe, this has been transformational, because all of a sudden, right, you can pay with glass, with plastic still, right, with a card, but now consumers are on the driver's seat, right? They can through these user interfaces, you can really have your credentials and really authenticate yourself with your face. The consumer experience is very good, and choose amongst very options. I mean, you will choose whatever you want. Do you want rewards, or do you want to a given kind of experience, right? Do you want to support a local merchant with a model of payment that has partnered with that local merchant? Are you making a payment um, in present, online, depending on whatever you want? It's a merchant that you're having a relationship one time, or it's a recurrent merchant. It changes completely, and it's opening a world of possibilities.
Thank you for that, Felipe. A lot of good points. Once again, I think the security aspect of it, the transition into operability among different systems and platforms. That's another very good point. Very excited to hear about the changes that are happening, the transformations that are happening in this industry, and how Mastercard has been leading some of that. So thank you for sharing your insight. Now, in the interest of time, I do want to ask you perhaps a final question and a bit of a catch-all question. We're very interested in what's happening not only at the national level, but also at the subnational level when it comes to social economic transformations in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, and we know that MasterCard is very, very involved in the City Possible network. So we want to ask you about that, how that connects, how that initiative and your participation there connects with the other steps that MasterCard is taking to advance financial and broader inclusion in the region. And taking this opportunity as well to ask you if there's anything else, any other initiatives you want to highlight from the MasterCard part to connect with some of the other points we mentioned. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, Pepe. So this is really interesting, because what's happening. There's a very interesting phenomenon for the federal government. It often, or the central government, right? It often takes some more time to make certain adjustments to the way they pay or get paid from their citizens. Um, Local governments, like governments of the states or cities, are more nimble, right, in their decision in how can they innovate. And when you think about governments, right, there's a lot of opportunities, right? There's so many flows that citizens, visitors, like tourists, need to pay the city, right, or the city needs to pay the visitor, right? You need to park your car, right, or your rental car if you're a tourist. You need to get a refund of VAT, right, if there's a program of VAT refund. Of course, you need to pay your real estate taxes. You need to pay your tickets, right? You know, uh, so there's a ton of opportunities, and I think that technology is becoming a game changer to those needs. Um, oftentimes, in Latin America, for example, Pepe, some of the cities we have, unfortunately, some of the cities with more congestion, right, in the city infrastructure. One of the possible solutions that have been floated, it's use more internal tolls within the city. That is also only possible through a system of payment that is electronic, that is automatic. You cannot do that manually. So I think that the possibilities that are being unlocked by new payment technologies, new ID technologies, are really truly being transformational, and are making the city something that that will be, when mayors and the management of cities there, and they're competing amongst themselves, right? That's very interesting. If a city starts being innovative, implementing the system, and show there's some demonstration effect, and it's easier for other cities to follow through. So I'm very optimistic about projects like City Possible, and I think this is going to be certainly transformational. And thank you for the opportunity to mention just a final thing. Yes, I mean, again, our ESG efforts are critical. I want to say, I joined this company, and since I joined, I have seen clear. I'm thinking about the commitment that we made in 2015 to include 500 million individuals in up to 2020. We have always set concrete goals, right, in terms of how to really benefit the societies when we work, and especially inclusion is a big thing. In 2020, we made another we committed to another goal, which was the inclusion of 1 billion individuals in the world, and 50 million SMEs. And it's easy to say, but hard to deliver. We have many initiatives. One that I will want to quote is a program to facilitate the payments to coffee growers that we did in Mexico and Colombia. That was a very interesting, because those communities typically rely heavily on cash, right? And that's very costly, that's insecure, and that's one of the projects that I like a lot, and it's part of this commitment. And if you're interested, or others, there's information online on that project.
Oh, thank you, Felipe. I have indeed heard about the coffee grower projects, I believe, in a separate conversation with some of your colleagues from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, I believe. Inclusion yep. is in the name of that branch of MasterCard. So certainly you guys take it very seriously, and overall, I can't agree more on the importance of ESG efforts. And this is something that's been echoed throughout the series of interviews. I do see that private sector players, multinational companies, are taking this very seriously at a local, regional level. And finally, thank you for your comments on City Possible. And we know that cities are more nimble in many cases than the federal government. They're hubs of innovation there, where a lot of pilots and interesting experiments in the public policy space is happening. And our colleagues at the Inter-American Development Bank has done a lot of interesting research on that regard as well. And it's good to hear from MasterCard's perspective what are some of the possibility of collaboration there is with the private sector. And once again, Felipe, that's all the time we have, I believe. But thank you once again for this very enriching, comprehensive interview. We look forward to talking to you again. And folks, thank you for tuning in. Felipe is Vice President of Public Policy for Latin America and the Caribbean and MasterCard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to keep talking and in touch. Thank you so much.